Hello everyone, my dear students, welcome. We continue working on Python and today lesson is super important, maybe one of the most important lessons. It's about functions. By the way, don't forget to support the channel by likes, comments. I would really appreciate that. So functions are crucial. It's about now not just coding. We're going to talk about planning software. Sometimes we call it software design. It's very important to break down a complex program into pieces, into meaningful units. We call them functions. We have already used some, let's say, coding units when we cover if statement, loop statements. We used a term block. So block is basically set of statements, something solid, something you can consider as one super statement. But blocks in if, in while, in for loops, they don't have names. Functions do. So function is not just a block of statements, it's a named block of statement. And that's your responsibility to create a good, meaningful, easy to remember name for your functions. As soon as you create or define the function, as soon as you invent the nice name for it, you provide the actual body of the function, the statements that belong to the function, and that's the first step. So working with the functions, we always consider two separate steps. Step 1, function definition. Step 2, function use. So functions can be used and reused over and over again. As soon as you define a function, later on you can reuse it many times from different places of your program. That's the beauty of the function. You make your code shorter, a lot shorter. You don't have to repeat similar tasks. You make your code more structured, nicer, easy to understand. Let's take a look. You see in lines 2 to 5 an example of a function. It's called greeting, and that's your job to invent a good name for your function. Of course, name may be long, then you use probably the same approach as for the variables. You capitalize next words in the function name, or you may use underscore. So you see in line 2 just the keyword def and the function name, because def is reserved word, it's in orange color. Because greeting, it's your identifier, the name you created, it's blue or navy. Finally, lines 3 to 5 are what your function is supposed to do. You see, it just prints 3 messages. Asterisks, hello John Brown message, and asterisks again. Very easy, very simple. But now, after I defined my function, I can reuse it. So what you see in line 7, 8, and 9, you see 3 functions calls. So it's not enough to define the function, you have to make it work. We call this calling or function call. So I call it 3 times, and as you may expect, let's run it. It's going to produce 3 times identical messages, and of course the final message main program is completed. It's important to understand because we put at the beginning of our file the definition, function definition. It's important to understand the program doesn't now start in line 2. The beginning of the program is line 7 because it's just information for computer how to call the function later on. So you don't start here, you start here. So from line 7 you jump to line 3, you execute all of that. After function finished, where you go? You go to the statement after the function call. So from line 5, I'm going to line 8, then again line 3, 4, 5, then line 9. So you have to understand very clearly the order of execution when you define and use functions. So you see in line 11 a comment, and it explains how the whole thing is working. Line 7 first, then function call 3, 4, 5, then line 8, then again 3, 4, 5, then line 9, 3, 4, 5, and finally 10. So this is a very basic example on functions, and of course we are going to develop, we are going to create more advanced functions, but a small, let's say, terminology announcement. Let's call because sooner or later, when you start creating real life, more or less complex programs, you're going to have many in your program, you're going to have many related functions, and sometimes I call, in order to express relationship between those functions, I call function that is calling another function, I call it parent, and the function which is being called by another function, I call it a child. So technically speaking, you may consider between functions parent-child relationship, and of course one function may call lots of other functions. So one parent may have many, of course, children, and more than that, the same function in real life application, in real life program, may be called by different functions. So technically speaking, you may have for one child a few parents. Basically, we talking here about software design, how to split your application into functions, how they're going to be related. It's very important to properly divide, properly define relationships. And by the way, in many languages, at least C, C++, and Java, even the simplest hello world program already requires a function. So you have to have, or you must have, let's say, top level function. Python doesn't require that. You see, I don't have to define function. I can just program, but technically speaking, if you like this approach, when your main program is done as a function, it is still possible. So Python doesn't enforce you to create top-level functions or main function, but you still have such an option. How to make your functions more versatile, more powerful, more flexible? You may use so-called parameters. For example, I want to print not just John Brown greeting. I want to print a greeting to everyone. And now you see a function which is much better than the previous one because I have parameters. So parameters are just two variables you declare in parentheses when you define your function, and later on they can be replaced by strings, by numbers. It depends on the type of the parameters, but technically speaking, parameters are just placeholders. So you see, I print in line 4 not John Brown. I print a variable first name and last name. Later on, when you call your function, you provide actual information to be printed. We call this arguments. So arguments is what you provide when you call your function. Parameters, or sometimes we call them formal parameters, that's what you define in a function definition. Parameters are placeholders, they are formal, but arguments, they are actual data your program supposed to deal with. And what you see in line 6, I print the same message for famous musician John Lennon. Then in line 7, I call in the same function, but the job going to be slightly different, and Paul McCartney message gonna be printed. In line 8, George Harrison. In line 9, Ringo Starr. So you see, parameters are to make your functions more flexible, more versatile, eventually more powerful. Let's run it. And yes, you see it's working nicely, and it prints whatever I pass to my function, it's going to print. Sometimes what you may do is when you call your function, you may provide before the argument parameter name. So this technique is kind of useful because it makes your coding easy to understand. And sometimes we call this approach keyworded arguments. You don't have to do that, but you may. So this name, it's easier to read. It's easy to understand what arguments are about, basically the purpose. You see the difference between line 6 and line 7. In line 7, you just print the data. you use the data, but in line 6, you explain the data. You explain what you pass. And it's a very good technique when we cover object-oriented programming in Python. Very soon we are going to, I think, use these keyworded arguments. Anyway, let's make sure it's working the same way. So there is no difference in terms of the result of the program. The difference is readability. So this call is easier to read, easy to understand. Now, when we cover loops, we realize that sometimes you have to get out. Something happened, no point to continue your loop. And we covered quite important operators, break and continue. They allow us to interrupt the current loop or the current loop iteration. Similarly, because functions may be very long, sometimes there are circumstances or situations you have to get out. For example, in my greeting function, I analyze the value of my arguments, and if the user by accident didn't provide me with a meaningful text, if when my function is called, one or two parameters are just empty, I terminate. I terminate the function, I don't print greeting, and return statement is to finish function ahead of time. So when return is executed, function is finished, and you jump straight to the next statement in your program after function call. Let's demonstrate it. So look, line 13 and line 14, my function calls not correct. It should be premature exit or return, and it should be a message function terminated. But lines 15 and 16 are good. Arguments are good, so the message should be, the greeting message or hello message should be printed nicely. Let's take a look. And yes, you see first name not provided, termination. Second call, last name now not provided, termination. Finally, the third is good, and the fourth is also good. So return statement is very important. You have to use it, or you will have to use it a lot in your practice. And next video, because it's a big topic, functions, I'm going to also explain how to use return with the expression. So you don't, or you not only terminating the function, you may also send back to the parent, to the calling function, something you need to send. So we are going to discuss next video how the child may talk to the parent, because right now through parameters the parent is talking to the child, parent is sending data to the function using parameters. However, if you want, child is also allowed to talk, and using return statement with the expression. Right now I use return as it is, but it could be more advanced. So we are going to cover next video how to return back to the parent some data from your function. Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate your comments and likes. Support the channel, and I'm gonna see you very soon. We going to continue our functions discussion. Bye bye. I wish you all the best.